I said to him, the Trikaya is basically different from the presentation of the Trinity in the Council of Nicaea, but it is similar to the presentation of the Trinity in the Apollinarian State. He said, thank you very much. Goodbye. It's very well trained mind. Very well trained mind. That was a very striking case for me of a bridge between traditions. You see, because he was a profoundly devout Christian that studied theology, it was actually very easy to bridge with him. My teacher, Geshe Rapton, had very close contacts with Franciscan monks and would teach meditation in Franciscan monasteries in Italy. And the communication was excellent, simply because once one is well trained in one tradition, one understands very quickly the similarities and differences of other traditions. Obviously, there are points where there's no point in discussing about the differences. The existence of God or the non-existence of God are fundamental. But there are points where it's easy to bridge, and one is trained to be able to do so. Nowadays, the situation is very difficult, because I think the majority of Austrians, when they come, really believe in nothing. At all. Or it's a big soup. That's the alternative. I'm not quite sure what's worse. And then, if they believe in nothing, they have a very powerful nihilist bias, which is almost impossible to counter. Because not only do they believe that really there is nothing, but in addition they believe that it can never be proven that there is anything but nothing. And if they have a soup in their mind, in other words, it's a big mixture of Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, New Age, etc., then whatever you say to them goes in the soup, and the soup has no flavor at all. So it is a very difficult situation nowadays. So difficult that His Holiness really has encouraged Westerners to think very carefully before converting to Buddhism, which was not at all the message of His Holiness when I started out. Besides, a very long answer to your question.
Is it time then for a new religion, so to speak, to combine the best of Buddhism and the best of our science?
I see you love soups. Who's going to decide what's the best? Right? Who says? My personal feeling is, when it comes to these matters, we should not be thinking of the collective. All of us are obsessed with the spread of Buddhism in the West, the creation of a new religion. Basically, these are things which don't concern us, and we have no power whatsoever in the field. What we do have some control over is our own development. And then I think personally that the way forwards is to focus on our own mental and spiritual development. If we develop ourselves, we will benefit. It's undeniable. And eventually, others will be influenced by our development. And in this way, we can really help others. If many choose to go this way, eventually an entire society is transformed. To artificially create some sort of synthesis of Buddhism and Christianity, Buddhism and science, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. But the road I think we have in front of us is a private individual road. Either we ourselves, well, first we have to choose to practice a religious tradition. Many people don't want to choose. I think it's a very characteristic trait of the modern mind to want to have it all at the same time. Choosing something means closing the doors to something else. So if we choose to be a Buddhist, we close the doors to being a Hindu. If we choose to be a Hindu, we close the doors to being a Christian. If we choose to be a materialist, we close the doors to all spiritual traditions. And it's very important to have mental clarity, to understand that everything is not compatible with everything else. Or as I said to two very nice old Western students of Kansunomichi who were asking me the Buddhism is not infinitely flexible. I mean, at a certain point, you are not a Buddhist. So this clarity is very important. And then once one has that clarity, one has to choose a spiritual tradition which corresponds to oneself. And then one must practice single-pointedly. Nothing is to be gained by soups. Mixing things, really, from what we see, it never benefits. At the beginning, one must investigate broadly, check all the spiritual traditions, monotheistic, the great Indian traditions. There are excellent introduction books on the monotheisms. There are excellent books on the great Indian religious traditions. And then find a religious tradition which one sincerely feels is true. And then verify whether it is true, to the limits of one's capacity. That's what we've tried to do here in this symposium. And I've tried to give you the arguments which I see, as I see it, make a strong point for core Buddhist teachings. We're not talking about the teachings about Mount Meru, but core Buddhist teachings being true and reflecting reality. Then, after that, it's out of my hands. So, within half an hour, my job is done. And your job starts, or does not start. That's entirely up to you. You have to live with the decisions you will be making. If you never start on a spiritual path, you have to live with the situation at the time of your death. The death of somebody who is a sincere materialist is very difficult. I have been present at a fair number of deaths in my life. Chris Ridley, our director, has much more experience than I do in the field, and I'm sure he can corroborate that these deaths are not easy. And at that time, it's too late. It's too late. It is all the going is good, or one is still in good health, or one's head is above the water, in all senses of the term, physically, psychologically, and even economically, then one has to put effort for the period which is difficult and which is approaching for all of us in this room. I mean, with maybe the exception of Maggie in the back, most of us are 50, 60, Maggie and Lily. Then that means there's what, 10, 20 years? Maybe quite a few less, so most of us are going, Aaron is young. 30 years for Aaron. But Aaron is working very hard. He is the one who has most of the time in front of you. Right? But that's what I would say. I would say human life is short. Very short. Then you have to put effort in what matters. What matters is finding what human destiny is. Where do we go after this life? If we go anywhere. And then it's been part of the main effort of mankind to find the answer to these questions. Which of the answers are true? And we have a fair bit of data which enables us to decide. And if we find something which we think is true, then we have to live it as intensely as we can. It's entirely up to us. Entirely up to us. I think as citizens of a developed country, we are very fortunate in some respects and very unfortunate in other respects. We're very fortunate because countries like Australia and most of the Western world, conditions are exceptional. I mean, we gather here, we have electricity, we have a magnificent setup in India. If I was presenting this topic, we have no loudspeakers or anything. I mean, if we had loudspeakers, we have to have a generator running outside of it. So the conditions are superb. All of you, all of us, are well fed, overfed, if anything, in excellent health. You want a book, you can buy a book. You want to study Buddhism, you can. The police, as in Tibet, is not there to prevent you from studying. But the conditions are superb. The downside is we're not exposed to any hardship. What we think of as hardship really isn't hardship. You see in Australia all the crying and the bleating now that a conservative government has come to power. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. A small change in welfare, and everyone is running around as if it's the end of the world. There are parts of the world people have no food. Then one has to have a certain amount of dignity. I mean, this is a country where everyone gets handouts. Then one gets a little bit less in terms of handouts. It behooves one to be modest and accept that, maybe there's not enough money. One accepts fewer handouts. There still are handouts, there's still money, there's food. So great hardship here one doesn't experience. As a result, the teachings do not penetrate easily the minds of the students. And I see a very great contrast with other Western societies. Let's say, for instance, Russia. I have many Russian friends. I'm fluent. I used to be near native in Russian. When you present the Buddhist teachings in Russia, a temple like this is full to the brim. People know what suffering is. They know firsthand. Violence, hardship, poverty, difficult conditions. And Russian students are marvelous students to have. They are driven. They are driven. The greater the level of comfort in the country, the slacker the student. Now what do you do? So that's why I think it's a toss, right? And I hope I can defend you with these comments, but I have seen fairly hard societies in my life, and I just wish all of our students could use the opportunities they have more than they have. It won't last forever. And now's the time. Everyone's heads above the water. Now's the time to put effort. Later on, you may not be able to do so, because most of us as Westerners, because we're not accustomed to hardship, we are weak. Right? But when the trouble really starts, will we be able to basically fight, function, survive, and at the same time have some type of practice? I don't know. Think of a country like Greece or Spain or Portugal, if you know the situation of these Western countries, where the economies have tanked in the last 2-3 years. Imagine if this happened to Australia. How would you handle it? A good friend of mine is an old friend. He's a geisha from the healthcare center at Sarah. We go back more than 15 years. Excellent monk. He was sent as a geisha to Barcelona in Spain 5-6 years ago. Then he loved it, even though he said their outlook is a bit strange. He said, whenever you present the Buddhist teachings about renunciation and so forth, they ask you, what about passion? He said, what is this passion business? I said, well, it's Latin culture. But it was very striking, because 2 years ago we met at Sarah, and I said to him, how's it going? The financial crisis had hit Spain. He said, so far, so good. He said, it's hit the country big time, but our students are taking it in stride. It has not hit the center too much. Then I met him this year in India during the intronisation of Bogin's reincarnation, my late teacher. And there was a lot of time. He came to me and he had some questions. I just waited until they came out. And I was very struck. In 1 year the difference. He said our students are facing great hardship. Unemployment in certain age groups is above 50%. And he said to me, our students live in a state of fear. They fear that if they lose their jobs, they will be unable to pay their mortgages, and they will end up on the street. They are unable to concentrate, unable to study, unable to meditate. And he asked me directly, he said, what would you propose? He said, I'm trying to find something I can say to them. What would you propose? I had nothing. In the past, I've always suggested that people reduce their debt load, but in a case like that, it's over. Then if the person has not trained their minds before such hardship happens, then how are they going to train their minds while it's happening? It's too late. So you yourselves, you are not in such a different situation. I mean, Australia has been described by some as a banana republic, as you know, totally dependent on mineral exports. In many respects, you are a satellite of China and Japan, of China mainly. You may know or know not this, but there's a big downturn going on right now in China. We have some contacts in Chinese factories that we communicate and engineer. I know Shanghai actually. He wrote me recently. He asked me how it was here. I said, so-so. I said, so how is it over there? He said, it's difficult. There's a big downturn in Chinese real estate, which is impacting all of the Chinese economy. Then when it comes here, and your lifestyles are under big pressure, will you have the strength So that's why, I encourage all of you to put effort now. The conditions are good, reasonably good. We have a good center, we have good teachers. You have access to books, to a library. You have free time, which is a very big thing in life. If you want to study, you can study. If you want to meditate, you can meditate. Because it may not be possible in 4 or 5 years. I was very struck in my last conversation with Rinpoche, before Rinpoche departed. Rinpoche's main focus was the actual survival of the center. The actual survival of the center. Rinpoche could see, or can see, quite far. So it's a long answer to your question. But just to say, we have excellent opportunities here. And my feeling is there is one place where greed is perfectly legitimate, and that's spiritual practice. Now, please be greedy, be demanding, give us a hard time, because that's what we're here for. Later on, it may be all you have. It may be. And my family has gone through great difficulties. Most of my family was killed in World War II. And I never forget my father was a very wealthy man in Yugoslavia before the war. He was supposed to become Minister of Health. Overnight, everything was destroyed. And he told me what he was left with was some philosophy he had studied in school. He was put in a concentration camp. He went from being a very important person to someone you could kill, at a moment's notice. But this philosophy he had studied, that helped his mind. And that's what we're doing here. Then do you have other questions? Yes, please.
We talked about reincarnation and possession. I saw an interview with a heart surgeon who'd done a lot of heart transplants and had written a book after about 20 years of doing the heart transplants and seeing the patients. And he came to realise that through studying all the recipients, that they very often took on character traits and personalities of the donors of the hearts that they received. And it could be that it could be something as simple as like they didn't used to eat spices at all, and now they were Vindaloo curry people. It was they were total. They used to hate jazz, now they love jazz. They used to hate sex, now they're a nymphomaniac. Whatever. It would be like, because one had received, sorry, that's probably a bit random, but like one had received a young woman who was a prostitute's heart, and she totally changed in character. Her husband was really surprised. So it was really interesting that when we talked about possession and reincarnation and where consciousness and mind sits in the body, that in organ transplant, and particularly heart, I would imagine, that you can take on part of the consciousness, mind, spirit, whatever you want to call it, of the donor. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
I've never heard of that. Normally, a heart is just an organ, right? It's a piece of matter.
I've heard of that.
You've heard of it?
Yeah.
Then I didn't know about that. Obviously, what is not impossible, you see, is that it's not so much the heart which would have an influence as other factors. Clearly, the heart is associated with an IFL person. If you receive the transplant of the heart of someone who's passed on, it's possible you might attract the spirit of the departed person. And without speaking of possession, you might be influenced. The Roman Catholic Church distinguishes in its demonology obsession, infestation, and possession. It's 3 stages leading to possession. And obsession would be the state where a person is under psychic pressure from the spirit. Something like that could be happening, but I don't know. I've not read the studies, I've not read this case. Do you have other questions?
Thank you for your exhortation to put into practice the Buddhist teachings. It's very good to hear. My question is a small one compared to that. For a while, I've tried to understand the increase in nature of karma. So, and thanks for the reference to chaos theory. I'll have a look at that. And I have wondered for quite some time why for the killing deed to be complete, why the victim needs to die before the perpetrator. I don't quite understand that. Because if the victim dies, the victim dies. I don't understand why the perpetrator needs to still be alive when the victim dies for it to be complete.
I don't understand it myself. I think it is related to the creation of a chain of 12 links within the life of the person.
Right.
But the topic of karma is an extremely difficult topic. It's much more difficult than emptiness. At the same time, frankly, it's much more beneficial for us. Because we probably would not be able to understand emptiness correctly. And few of us have the time to meditate seriously. But if we are able to live in keeping with karma and causality, then over time, over lives, things will go very well for us. We can progress upwards, eventually become perhaps ordained, and start practicing seriously, gain liberation of full enlightenment and function of our goals. So I don't have a complete answer, but I think it is linked to the 12 links constitution of our lifestyle. Do you have other questions?
I just wanted to reconcile something in my notes. I may have not taken this down correctly, but I've written here, not every event is karma, but the pleasure or suffering experienced by the mind is karma. Did I hear that correctly? And then just beyond that, it was mentioned about the type of rebirth, I guess the birth being an event, and then the completing karma, which are the events within that life. These are all events, and they're linked to karma, but prior to that you had said that not an event is karma, but the mind experiencing the event is karma, and I can't reconcile that.
Well, that was casual speaking on my part. Basically, in strict Buddhist philosophy, karma gives rise to pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral experiences. All pleasant or unpleasant experiences are necessarily the product, respectively, of virtuous and non-virtuous karma. It's not the case that every single human experience, without exception, during every moment of the day, is a product of one specific karmic event. If that were the case, there would be really no possibility to change one's behavior at all. It would be completely conditioned. Then, when it comes to projecting and completing karma, obviously the main features or the nature of a rebirth is a direct result of past karma, past projecting karma, which has to be a complete deed with 4 features. Not all the features in that rebirth are the result of completing karma, but the features which cause happiness or suffering are. Well, for instance, in the case of Vijayaragni, the deformation of his right arm is a source, obviously, of great suffering from birth. Then this is an instance of completing karma. In his life, it's difficult to see what was a result of virtuous completing karma. Difficult to see. The result of virtuous projecting karma was his human rebirth, which obviously is a source of happiness, since he does not experience the suffering of rebirth as an animal or any animal. But let us say, for instance, my buying this laser pointer is not the result of virtuous or non-virtuous karma in either case. It's a result of intra-life causality. There may be a karmic link, there may not be a karmic link. But the exact understanding of karma is a very difficult topic. The moment you go beyond the general principles, it's very difficult. This is why it is said that more general principles of karma can be understood independence and influence without colonizer. Specific karmic correlations can only be understood by Buddha Shakyamuni or the Buddhas himself because it needs omniscience. And when I presented the case of Vijayaratne, I presented a hypothetical reconstruction. There is no way I can tell you whether this is actually the karmic cause for his rebirth in the harem or not, although it looks very convincing. And there is no way I can tell you whether what gave rise to key elements in his human life are related to elements in life number one. Again, it seems probable, but it is impossible for an ordinary sentient being, such as myself, to make such a statement. So this was given as a hypothetical case to show you how it would work. Buddha Shakyamuni himself was able to do this. Buddha Shakyamuni was able, when given, for instance, a piece of wood, to say exactly what tree, from what area, under whose ownership that piece of wood came from. We do not have that capacity. Do you have other questions?
I have a small. Oh, thank you. The part about remembering the fire, could that be perhaps remembering death by fire instead of a hell, being in hell?
Possibly, but why at that moment? It was the last memory he had. It's very difficult to know what it is. It could be simply caused by the pain of the noose. But it's very striking. He describes it as a very clear memory of blazing flames and then death. Well, then absence. Absence. I have extrapolated this as the first instant of a hell rebirth. Because when a very powerful non-virtuous deed is committed, and one is reborn in the lowest hell of Avicii, one does not go through the dissolutions, and one does not go through the Bhagavad state, the intermediate state. Instead, one basically falls down like a stone. That's the metaphor which is used. Then the deed in question probably became very powerful because of the factors we talked about. This was an innocent person who was defenseless, who was weaker than human. The deed was premeditated. The poor girl was stabbed repeatedly. Then he rejoiced in the deed, did not repent. All of this amplifies the deed and turns a heavy murder, a non-virtuous deed of murder of another human being, into a deed which can cause rebirth in one of the non-recognized. I suspect Avicii, because this is how Avicii is described. Avicii is described as a hell in which oneself is fire and one is surrounded by fire. Then the topic of the hell realms is a disturbing topic. I think all of us would like very much that they not exist. But the question is not so much what we would like, but whether it is possible that such rebirths exist or not, and if they do, definitely we should try not to experience them. And it's interesting that all of the major religions in the world teach the existence of a hell. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism all teach the existence of hell. So obviously you can say, if you're materialistically inclined, that this is taught to keep people in their right place. But it is also perfectly possible that great mystics had experiences which showed them that after death, those who had harmed others could experience intolerable levels of suffering. And what's interesting is that not the details, but the core descriptions of the hells is completely identical. Core description of the Christian hell and the Buddhist hell, there's no difference. Then the details, the 8 hot hells, the 8 cold hells, that is different. But the key elements, no. So I have always wondered if this was a Then I have not presented those here, but there are a series of distressing near-death experiences, typically of people who experience a near-death experience because of attempted suicide or drug usage, and who in the near-death experience saw what we would call Yamamuts, helpers of Yama, guardians of the hell, come to drag them down to the hell realms. And these experiences were made by Westerns, Americans. And now there's quite a bit of research on these distressing near-death experiences. It's more than 30% of the near-death experiences, and it seems to have remained a very taboo topic in the field. Again, a materialist would say that this is due to the drugs ingested, to the distress at the time of suicide, but it's also perfectly possible that these hell guardians exist. Oh, it's food for thought for all of us, you know. Yes?
Just within the last few minutes, are you able to comment on the compatibility of the Gangian religions, Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, vis-a-vis quantum physics, as opposed to the theistic religions?
Well, I think if we look at core elements of the theistic religions, which are very powerful for mental transformation, I have to say this at the beginning. Scholars have said this repeatedly, and I think theistic religions are of tremendous benefit for a large number of people. The idea of a personal God to whom he is personally responsible is very powerful for mental transformation. But philosophically, all theistic religions teach that God created a universe which is exterior to himself and exterior to us at the beginning. This universe is real and is independent of our perception of it. This is a core teaching of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It is central to these religions because otherwise you end up with pantheism, where God and the universe fuse. Then if the universe is external to God and external to us as beings in the universe, we're speaking of, philosophically, strong realism. Strong realism is not compatible with quantum mechanics. I think that really, at present, can be said quite unambiguously. Then there are Christian mystics, Muslim mystics, Jewish mystics, who at odds with the dominant theology of the religion have said, for instance the case of Meister Eckhart, that the world is very close to being one with God. These viewpoints were condemned as heresy, so they really are not mainstream. Then such a viewpoint, especially if beings themselves and beings' consciousness was seen as fusing, coming close to matter, might be much more compatible with quantum mechanics. But this is not the mainstream view at all. Whereas in the case of Indian philosophies, specifically Vedanta, Chittamatra, and Prasangika Madhyamika Buddhism, it is explicitly taught that there is a very close connection between the world and our minds. For Chittamatra, our minds and the world we perceive are one in nature. For Prasangika Madhyamika, they are interdependent. These views are strongly compatible with quantum mechanics. Does that answer your question, Grace?
Just to follow from that, you said there were two camps in quantum mechanics. There was the measurement camp and the observer camp. And when you mentioned that Chittamatras basically have mind and observation of mind as mingled, sounds like they sit in the measurement camp.
Those are just terms I use to make it more obvious. Nobody in quantum mechanics says that they are members of the measurement of the observer camp. But I just wanted, sometimes you have to, we say in French, forcer le trait, you have to emphasize things a bit excessively to make it clear. The terms observation and measurement, as used in quantum mechanics and as used in Chittamatra, are different. Basically, what you do have in quantum mechanics is two broad divides between those who assert it is mind, which is non-material, which causes the collapse of the wave function, and it is actually an observation with physical means which causes the collapse of the wave function. This is what I meant when I spoke of the observation and measurement camps. Then obviously the first camp in quantum mechanics is non-materialistic. The second camp, Heisenberg's book and so forth, will probably be materialistic. The debate continues to the present day. I'm not saying that it is resolved at all, but sympathy has really increased dramatically for von Neumann's viewpoint. It just seems to fit with much of the recent data. Do you have any other questions before we go our separate ways? And I have a small question for you. What will you do as a result of this symposium? What are your projects for the next year? Will it have an impact? Good.
Study and reading.
Good. Read Stevenson's very good. Anyone else? Do you have any projects? Is there anything you have sort of resolved to do in the next year or so?
I'd like to look at Cameron causality more diligently.
That's good. That's very good. You cannot go wrong if you try to read Stevenson with Lambdin Chemo in the background. It's not easy. At the beginning I would say perhaps just read Stevenson. At a certain point, take Lambdin Chemo's section in common causality and try to see, is this true or not? Look at Stevenson's cases. We have some good cases there. We have cases of children remembering 2, 3, even 4 lives. Remembering human lives, sometimes animal lives, sometimes human lives. We have the books in the library. If you can afford them, I would suggest try to order them. These books are progressively running out of print. Once you follow this path, you will find that you refer to them again and again. And then there is another book I would like to recommend again to all of you. And it is, and I've seen that somebody has it already, it is Irreducible Mind by Kelly. As Stevenson's book on the third bibliography, Irreducible Mind was the psychology for the 21st century in the general section. It's still in print, it's not very expensive. It is a work which is worth studying through in great detail with a magnificent bibliography. And as you know, a bibliography basically is what points you to further reading. Then, with Kelly and Stevenson, I think you have really everything that is needed to build your practice on very solid grounds. Very solid.
And we have Irreducible Mind in the library. There's a copy in there, but I think it might be taken out already. So there is a copy in there, and we do have one copy in the bookshop for purchase as well.
Then Kenny basically is one of the members of the Division of Personality Studies at the University of Virginia, Stevenson's division. And obviously they have drawn very heavily on the works of a psychologist, a British psychologist, F.W.H. Meyer, who lived in the 19th century, and who was trying to explain some of the problems we addressed. I would say you could jump the sections in F.W.H. Meyer, in Irreducible Mind. Meyer is a bit of a precursor of Carl Jung. If your focus is a Buddhist focus, it's not terribly helpful as a system of explanations. So there are chapters there you can skip, or you may choose to read them, it's up to you. But the work itself is exceptional, absolutely exceptional. Any other questions? Please.
You talked about being bridge, and you're always most useful in exposing the gaps that I have in my ability to actually grasp a lot of this. And so I'm learning how to learn, in effect. And so I'm wondering if you have any suggestions. You mentioned, understanding chaos theory and fractal theory. You talked previously on other occasions around set theory. for someone that doesn't have a huge academic capacity and wants to bridge the gap to even be able to enter the path and actually be able to, improve reading comprehension. There's a whole range of academic skill sets that I understand that I'm deficient in some degree, to be able to really capture the essence of the teachings. What can you suggest as a starting point?
I think ideally a study of logic, which are the means of thinking, a study of Buddhist logic would be extremely helpful to you. We don't teach Buddhist logic at TBI because it occurs or it is taught in the context of debate. And this would entail daily debates of 1 hour or more, and it just is not practicable. Students do not have that amount of time. If that is not possible, I think focusing on the courses Geshe Japa Gyaltsen gives every Tuesday and participating in the discussions, which are pretty close to debate, will help you tremendously. Then the reading on the side, that you have to do by yourself. Geshe is not trained in that field. It's basically, with the exception of a couple of great teachers like historians, very few Tibetan masters are able to bridge things in that way. It's something we have to do individually. And my goal in giving you the bibliographies is to give you some gateways. Then I would suggest, if you can, order the books. Many of the articles can be obtained for free on the internet. The articles are quite technical. I think you might find them overwhelming. But some of the books are quite accessible. You reduce them in mind. Pays careful study. Then you have to study it yourself. Stevenson, I think reading through Stevenson, studying Kelly, and not reading casually. You take the cases, and you have to read them analytically, pencil in hand, underlining the key points. And then at the end, stopping and asking yourself for each individual case, what does this case prove? If 2 lives are reported, what is the relationship? Then perhaps go to Langdon Chenmo and say, is this in keeping with Langdon Chenmo's teachings on common causality or not? If not, ask Geshe Japa Gyaltsen. Then proceed in this way and progressively your understanding will deepen. At some point in the future, if we can, it would be marvelous if we would have teachings of Buddhist logic and debate at TBI. Thank you very much.
Lydia, once again, you've shown depth and breadth of your knowledge of historical experience. It's breathtaking, and it is such a great privilege that we have been able to gather here for those of us who have been here for the whole weekend or even just today to be challenged and stimulated and pointed in the right direction in terms of our lives, our practice. And so, we will be eternally grateful if we hear what you're saying to, we have this real opportunity to be able to have the advantage of hearing what you've been saying. And I think what you're saying has literally world-shattering implications, and so we will do our best to broadcast what you've been saying, and we look forward to the publication as you described earlier. Food for thought. So, just a very tiny token. I know that you have absolutely no attachment to very fine chocolate, but nevertheless, just a small token of appreciation.
Look at my wife's face.
If you just join me again in thanking her.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming, and you're welcome if you would like to grab a cup of tea before you break off. And as Julia said,